Owen's voice came from the bedroom, interrupting the steady hum of the kitchen fan. "Hey, have you seen my gray tie?" he called, rifling absently through the dresser drawers. He wasn't putting much effort into the search. Deep down, he knew Sophia probably remembered exactly where it was. "It's on the top shelf in the closet where you left it after last week's meeting," Sophia replied from the kitchen. Her response was casual, but there was a faint undertone that didn't quite match her words. "You really need to keep track of your things," she added playfully, though there was an underlying tension beneath her light reproach. Owen chuckled softly, and the sound echoed through the bedroom. "I'd probably lose my head if you weren't around," he joked, heading toward the closet. Sure enough, the tie was right where she had said. He picked it up, smiling and shaking his head. Standing in front of the mirror, he carefully began to tie it, his thoughts drifting along a familiar path. His life wasn't thrilling, but it was steady, and for Owen, that was enough. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sophia stirred the soup, glancing at the clock with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. "Dinner's almost ready," she called out, her eyes still fixed on the stove. Her movements were automatic, as if this ritual had repeated innumerable times. For Owen, this predictability was exactly what he had always wanted. Growing up in a chaotic household, he'd come to value stability. A dependable job, a loving wife, and a brother living nearby. What more could he want? "Smells amazing, honey," Owen said as he walked into the kitchen, already loosening the freshly tied tie. He leaned against the counter, watching her stir the soup. Her movements were fluid, but her mind seemed somewhere far away. Sophia glanced at him briefly, offering a short smile. "It's just soup, nothing special," she replied, her face tightening slightly before she refocused on the pot. Owen didn't notice. His attention had already shifted to his phone. Later that evening, after dinner, Owen sat at the dining table, typing away on his laptop, working on a report. The only sounds in the house were the gentle clinking of dishes as Sophia washed up and the rhythmic tapping of his keys. Drying her hands, Sophia looked at him, her gaze lingering a moment longer than usual. "I'm going to bed," she said softly, her voice quieter than normal. Owen barely looked up, engrossed in his work. "Don't stay up too late," she added, leaning down to kiss his cheek. Her lips felt cool against his skin. Owen blinked, meeting her gaze for a brief moment, and gave a slight smile, muttering distractedly, "I won't, just finishing up." His focus quickly returned to the screen. The usual warmth of her goodnight kiss faded quickly from his thoughts. Sophia cast him one last glance before heading upstairs. The house fell into silence, and as time passed, Owen found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. His thoughts kept drifting back to how Sophia had acted earlier. Nothing was obviously wrong, but a slight unease lingered in the air, as though a subtle chill had settled in the room after she left. Rubbing his hands, Owen tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. His gaze settled on her laptop, left open on the table after she used it. He stared at it for a long moment, convincing himself there was no reason to interfere. He had never been one to pry, but tonight felt different. A persistent curiosity gnawed at him. His hand hovered over the trackpad, hesitating. "It's nothing," he murmured to himself. "I'm just overthinking." Before he could stop himself, his fingers clicked on the files, and a pang of guilt stirred within him. "I won't find anything, will I?" he reassured himself, convinced it was just a fleeting feeling, and that as soon as he found nothing, this strange tension would disappear. Owen's gaze fell on a folder labeled Good Times. At first glance, the title seemed harmless, but an inexplicable feeling of dread crept over him. His heart raced as a dark foreboding settled in, yet curiosity pushed him forward. His fingers trembled as he clicked to open the file, and in that instant, his world began to crumble. The screen filled with images, each one more shocking than the last. They were personal, intimate, and clearly compromising photos. His wife, Sophia, appeared in every shot, but she wasn't alone. Staring back at him from the images was Lucas, Owen's own brother, standing beside her. Owen feverishly scrolled through the horrifying photos, unable to stop himself. Each click struck him like a physical blow, his heart pounding while anger, confusion, and disbelief grew with every new image. With each photo, the betrayal cut deeper. Just when he thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Among the photos were scattered messages, dozens of them, between Sophia and Lucas, describing their affair in painstaking, agonizing detail. Despite the nausea rising within him, Owen kept reading. The messages were filled with flirtation, laughter, and secrets they'd shared behind his back. But one message made him freeze, its words searing into his memory forever. This loser won't be back from his next trip. The hitman is ready. We'll make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Once he's gone, we'll take the insurance money and finally be together. We'll be swimming in cash. Owen recoiled in his chair, his body numb as the full weight of the revelation crashed over him. His wife and his brother, the two people he trusted most, were plotting to kill him. He gasped for air, his chest tightening as the sickening reality of their conspiracy glared back at him from the screen. This was no joke. They had been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to end his life and seize everything. Rage boiled within him, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The home that had once felt so safe suddenly became a cage, trapping him. How could Sophia, the woman he had loved for so many years, the woman he had considered his own, be capable of such treachery? And Lucas, his own blood, how could he be so calculated, so cold-hearted? Owen's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his mind was in turmoil. Should he confront them, call the police? His thoughts spun in every direction, but one thing was crystal clear. He couldn't let them win. The life he'd thought was secure, the trust he'd built with them, was a lie. And now they were preparing to destroy him for their own gain. But Owen was not about to let that happen. The calm facade of his life was ready to shatter, unleashing a storm neither Sophia nor Lucas could have anticipated. They had underestimated him. That would be their biggest mistake. That night, Owen sat alone in the kitchen, his mind a whirlwind, as the dim light from the stove cast long shadows on the walls. Despite the fury still burning within him, he was eerily calm on the outside. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. His hands rested on the table, his fingers tapping a rhythm as he tried to subdue the storm inside him. His gaze was fixed on the wooden surface, but his thoughts were far ahead, planning his next move. Facing Sophia directly was not an option, not yet. This was no longer just about betrayal. It was about survival. "I won't let them win," he muttered under his breath, taking a deep, steadying breath to calm himself. An emotional outburst wouldn't solve the problem. He needed to think strategically, plan meticulously, and be patient. Sophia and Lucas thought they had fooled him, that he was oblivious, but they had made a fatal mistake. No more. His first priority became securing his finances. Using the very laptop that had exposed their betrayal, Owen acted swiftly and precisely, transferring his assets into a private trust. Every step was calculated, driven by a single goal: to protect himself and prepare for the moment when he could confront them and take control of his own fate. Owen's fingers danced over the keyboard, though his thoughts had long outpaced his actions. In his mind, Lucas deserved nothing, not a cent, not even the air he breathed. The rhythmic tapping of the keys filled the silence of the house, the only sound in that still space. A few more keystrokes, and it was done. The money was secure, but the more challenging part still lay ahead. Owen leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm his pounding heart. Taking a deep breath, he rose and quietly moved toward the front door, where Sophia's handbag hung. Without a second thought, he slipped a GPS tracker into one of its hidden compartments. It was discreet, practically invisible. She would never notice. For a moment, Owen froze, clenching his teeth as a wave of anger surged within him. The thought of her meeting Lucas again stirred a dark rage in him, but he suppressed it. Now was not the time to lose control. He returned to the kitchen and sank back into his chair, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Upstairs, Sophia slept peacefully, unaware that her carefully crafted plans were already unraveling. Owen stared blankly at the ceiling, his mind too alert for sleep. This was not the night for rest. There was still too much to do. The next morning, Sophia came downstairs, already dressed and ready for a new day. "You're leaving today, right? Business trip?" she asked, sipping her coffee as if everything was the same as usual. "Yes," Owen replied, keeping his voice steady. "Early flight. I'll be back in a few days." She gave him a brief smile, though there was something strange in her eyes, a hint of doubt. "Travel safe," she said, giving him a peck on the cheek, just like always. It was their usual ritual. Owen nodded, took his bag, and left the house. But instead of heading to the airport, he drove straight to a law firm in town. His meeting with the divorce attorney was short but substantial. He laid everything out: the affair between Sophia and his brother, the insurance fraud, the plan with the hired hitman, backing up his claims with saved messages. "It should be straightforward," the attorney said, tapping his pen on the desk. "With this evidence, you have a strong position." "Good," Owen replied coldly. "She won't get a cent of my money." "We'll make sure of it," the attorney assured, carefully placing the documents in a folder. "You'll be fully protected." As Owen left the office, a strange calm washed over him. Everything was in motion. His assets were safe, and the divorce was only a matter of time. All that remained was to dismantle their entire scheme. But for now, they needed to believe they still had control. He parked in a secluded lot and pulled out his phone to check the tracker he had slipped into Sophia's bag. The device was working, showing her movements in real time. He watched as she went about her usual activities, shopping, going to the gym, until around noon, when her location began shifting toward the city outskirts. Owen's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. He knew exactly where she was heading. By 4 p.m., the dot on the screen stopped near a small, secluded cafe on the city's edge. Owen's heart pounded as he zoomed in on the screen. She wasn't alone. Lucas's truck was parked outside. From the safety of his car, Owen watched them inside the cafe, unaware they were being observed. The cafe was quiet and private, the perfect spot for secret meetings. Owen had never been there before, but he recognized it from photos Sophia had once posted. It was their place. They sat in a secluded corner, away from prying eyes, talking in low voices. He could see them occasionally laughing, Lucas leaning in close to Sophia, whispering something in her ear. Owen's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white as he watched every movement, every detail. Every shared laugh or exchanged glance between them felt to Owen like a knife driven deeper into his chest. But he maintained his focus. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about gathering evidence. Steeling his resolve, he quietly raised his phone and took a few pictures, capturing their meeting. He couldn't hear their conversation, but at this point, words were meaningless. He had everything he needed. The day dragged on as Sophia and Lucas lingered at the cafe, seemingly without a care in the world. Owen's mind simmered with thoughts of revenge, yet he reminded himself to stay calm. Patience was crucial. There was no room for haste. Finally, they left. Lucas escorted Sophia to her car, leaning in to exchange a few parting words. Sophia drove off, and Owen followed her, heading back toward the city. Lucas remained behind, casually lighting a cigarette near his truck, blissfully unaware of the approaching storm. Owen's phone vibrated. On the screen was a message from his divorce attorney. "Everything is ready." He read it and looked back at Lucas, who still had no idea that his carefully crafted life was about to fall apart. As Owen drove away, his thoughts were clearer than they had been in days. Sophia thought she was safe, and Lucas believed he was in control. Neither suspected what was coming. By the time Sophia returned home that evening, Owen was already settled in his hotel on the other side of town, tracking her movements through a small device he'd slipped into her handbag. Sophia was oblivious. She went about her usual evening routine, smiling as though her life was as steady as ever. But Owen knew better. Her betrayal had set off a chain of events that couldn't be stopped. Lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, he felt a cold satisfaction. The gears were in motion, and soon Sophia and Lucas would face the consequences of their actions. For now, Owen only had to wait. The trap was set. Sitting at the small table in his rented apartment, he gripped a disposable phone tightly. It was time to move to the next step. Sophia and Lucas thought themselves clever, believing they were in control, but they had no idea whom they were dealing with. Owen was far from the fool they took him for. They were walking right into his meticulously planned trap. The first call to the hitman was brief and to the point. Owen's voice was calm, devoid of emotion. "I'm a jealous husband," he said in a steady tone. "They're cheating on me. I want them gone. Make it look like a robbery." The hitman, eager for quick cash, asked no unnecessary questions. He only needed to know when and where. Owen gave him just enough information to pique his interest without relinquishing control. The hitman thought he was working for Lucas and Sophia. By the time the truth surfaced, it would be too late. Owen was ready to initiate the next phase of his plan. He opened an app on his phone and watched as it tracked Sophia's location. She was home, likely preparing dinner, still playing the role of the perfect wife. The thought of her standing in their kitchen, pretending nothing had changed, made Owen clench his teeth. He refocused on the hitman. Over the past week, Owen had been feeding him a narrative, crafting an image of a man consumed by jealousy. "They'll be together soon," he told the hitman in their last conversation. "I'll give you the details when the time comes." Today, that time had arrived. Dialing the hitman's number on the disposable phone, Owen's hand was steady. The phone rang twice before a rough voice answered. "Yeah?" "It's time," Owen said, his voice even and devoid of feeling. "Tomorrow night, they'll be at the house outside of town. The place is isolated. No neighbors." "Give me the address," the hitman replied, his impatience evident. Owen felt it too. Everything was falling into place. Owen quickly dictated directions on how to reach the old cabin, hidden deep within the forest, the very one he and Lucas had visited countless times in their childhood. Isolated and far from civilization, the place was perfect for what he had planned. "Make it look like a robbery," Owen ordered calmly, his voice cold and steady. "Take whatever you need to make them believe it. I'll pay you half now, the rest after it's done," he added, finalizing the arrangement. The hitman grunted in agreement. "Consider it done. They won't suspect a thing." With these words, Owen ended the call. His heart thudded heavily in his chest, filled with a turbulent mix of anger and grim satisfaction. The plan was officially set in motion. The hitman believed his targets were Lucas and Sophia, while they remained blissfully unaware, thinking they'd outsmarted Owen. But he was far from naive. The next morning, Owen meticulously reviewed every detail to ensure nothing was left to chance. He called his lawyer to confirm the divorce papers were ready to be filed at any time. Using the GPS tracker he had installed in advance, he checked Sophia's location. By noon, she was meeting Lucas at their usual spot, a small cafe on the outskirts of town. They looked happy, laughing, completely unsuspecting. Owen watched them from a distance, controlling his emotions. The fire of rage he once felt had hardened into something cold and calculated. He didn't need to confront them or hear their excuses. His goal was to make them feel the helplessness he had endured when he first learned of their betrayal. So he continued setting up all the details. He withdrew the money for the hitman, placing the cash in an inconspicuous envelope, which he securely tucked into his coat pocket. Then he drove to the cabin to ensure everything was just as he remembered. The place was remote, surrounded by dense trees, with no neighbors for miles. When night fell, he parked his car out of sight and waited. The hitman was due to arrive at any moment, and Owen wanted to witness it all himself. At exactly 7:20 p.m., a black van appeared on the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin. A tall, rugged man with a weathered face stepped out, scanned his surroundings briefly, then headed for the cabin door. Owen watched from his hiding spot, knowing that for the hitman, this was just another routine job. From his car, parked hundreds of yards away, Owen observed through binoculars. He saw the faint glow from inside. This was the home he had once shared with Sophia, which had now become a symbol of their betrayal. A suppressed feeling filled his chest, not sadness, but a relentless sense of purpose. Inside the cabin, Sophia and Lucas were at ease, laughing and blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. Owen could almost picture them in the living room, celebrating what they believed was a successful scheme. They were sure Owen was far away, busy with work and completely oblivious to their plans. Admittedly, they had played their roles well, pretending to care for him, pretending he mattered. But the hour of reckoning was near. Through the window, Owen saw Lucas pour 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Sophia. They raised their glasses, toasting to a future that would never come. The sight made Owen's stomach turn, but he remained outwardly calm. He had long since stopped feeling anything. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Owen's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His pulse quickened as he saw Lucas casually set down his glass and head toward the door, completely unsuspecting. Owen's heart pounded wildly in his chest, but outwardly he remained composed, showing no emotion. He knew exactly what would happen next. When Lucas opened the door, his carefree expression immediately shifted. Standing before him was the hitman, silent and menacing, ready to complete the job. Confusion flashed across Lucas's face. Then came the realization. There was no time to react. The hitman raised his gun, and the night shattered with the deafening crack of the first shot. The blast echoed off the trees like a fatal reverberation. Lucas staggered backward, clutching his chest as a dark stain spread across it. His wide, shocked eyes were filled with disbelief. His fingers groped blindly in the air, seeking something solid that could stop his inevitable fall. But there was nothing around to grasp. Sophia's scream pierced the silence, high and filled with horror. She froze for a moment, her eyes wide with shock. The wine glass she was holding slipped from her hands and shattered into 1,000 pieces as it hit the floor. "No, no!" she cried, her voice cracking as she rushed toward Lucas. But it was too late. He collapsed to the floor, gasping, life slipping away with each breath. The killer entered the room, quietly closing the door behind him. His expression was calm, almost indifferent, as though this was just another routine job. He glanced briefly at Sophia, who stepped back, her hands trembling, her face pale. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered, her voice quivering, barely holding back panic. "You were only supposed to—" Her words were cut off, stifled by fear. Her eyes darted around the room in desperate search of an escape, but there was none. The killer stood unmoving, his intentions clear. Outside, seated in his car, Owen watched, his heartbeat steady and calm. He could almost feel Sophia's tension, seeping through the walls. She had miscalculated. Everything had gone wrong. She thought she was in control, but now fear had gripped her, and for the first time she realized the situation was beyond her control. Yet the killer was unperturbed. He had orders, and the job was not yet finished. Slowly, he raised the gun again, pointing it directly at her. Sophia pressed herself against the wall, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, choked with fear. "It wasn't supposed to end like this." The killer's finger wrapped around the trigger. He didn't hesitate. The gunshot echoed. The sound of a second shot pierced the silence, and Sophia collapsed, clutching her stomach. Blood quickly spread across her shirt as she looked up, her eyes wide with pain and terror. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her body convulsed, trembling as her strength faded. With each moment, her breaths grew weaker, life slipping away with each exhale. Owen closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel the gravity of the moment. He had imagined this scene countless times since learning of their betrayal. But now, watching their death, he felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the cold truth. It was over. They had made their choices, and now they were paying for them. A few minutes after the killer left, Owen stepped out of the car and headed toward the house. The night remained calm and quiet, oblivious to the violence that had just unfolded inside. He pushed open the front door, carefully stepping over the shards of Sophia's broken glass. The air was thick with the sharp metallic scent of blood, heavy and stifling. Lucas lay dead in the middle of the living room, his lifeless eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Sophia's body was slumped against the wall, her once beautiful face contorted with pain and terror. Owen stood still, assessing the scene before taking out his phone. He dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. Owen spoke in a calm, detached tone. There's been a robbery, he said. 2 people are dead, my wife and my brother. He paused for a moment, then added, It seems something went wrong. The operator asked for more details, maintaining a professional tone. Owen responded without hesitation, describing the events as if he were reading from a script. He explained the break-in, the gunshots, and what followed. He made no mention of the killer's involvement. Owen didn't keep her waiting long. I'll stay here, he quietly said before the call ended. Please hurry. As the line went silent, he slowly lowered himself into one of the chairs, his gaze fixed on the lifeless figures before him. They were the ones who had betrayed him. Sirens would sound any minute. Soon, the house would be swarming with police, bright yellow tape cordoning off the area. A flood of questions was inevitable, but Owen had planned everything. Every trace of his involvement had been carefully erased. In the eerie silence, something shifted within him. The life he'd known was now part of the past, a fact that no longer troubled him. Sophia and Lucas had shattered it the moment they chose to betray him. Now, he was free. Free from their lies, free from the suffocating weight of betrayal. His gaze landed on the clock on the wall, following each slow tick of the second hand. The police would arrive at any moment. This chapter would soon be closed. But for now, he sat in silence, letting the gravity of the moment settle in his mind. They had planned his death. But in the end, he struck first. The faint wail of sirens began to cut through the night from afar. They had fallen into the very trap he'd meticulously set. Only the aftermath remained now. The monotonous hum of medical equipment was the first thing Sophia heard as she drifted into consciousness. Her body felt unbearably heavy, as though an invisible weight pressed down on her chest, making each breath labored. She squinted at the harsh, sterile glare of fluorescent lights, her vision still hazy. Panic rose in her throat as she tried to remember what had happened. Her mind was foggy, fragments of that night flaring up in broken flashes, wine, Lucas's carefree laughter, the doorbell, a gunshot. She bolted upright, pain slicing through her body. The realization hit her like a truck. Lucas was dead. She should have been dead too. The killer, the betrayal, everything had gone horribly wrong. But she was alive, but broken. Every cell in her body ached, her torso wrapped in bandages that felt like a stifling reminder of her failure. Clenching her teeth, she shifted slightly, trying to piece together the fragments of that catastrophic night. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything that could explain what had happened. But all she saw were empty hospital walls and the machines sustaining her life. She tried to sit up again, but the pain was too intense. Resigned, she fell back onto the bed, her gaze fixed on the ceiling as tears filled her eyes. Lucas was gone. Everything she'd had was gone. Their plan had crumbled and Owen had emerged victorious. The bitter taste of regret filled her mouth as the weight of her new reality settled into her consciousness. A soft knock on the door pulled her from these torturous thoughts, drawing her attention. She turned her head, wincing as fresh pain seared through her body. It was him. Owen stood in the doorway, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He didn't move, simply watching her in silence. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. Maybe he had come to forgive her. Perhaps, despite everything, they still had a chance to salvage something. Surely he would understand. She'd made a terrible mistake, but they could fix it. They could rebuild everything. "Owen," she whispered, her voice fragile, breaking with emotion. He stayed silent a moment longer, then slowly approached, stopping at the foot of her bed. His gaze was unwavering, his eyes colder than she'd ever seen. A new, unforgiving hardness appeared on his face. The distance between them felt enormous, far greater than the physical space that separated them. That icy indifference filled her with fear. "Owen, please!" she begged, her voice trembling with desperation. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can fix it. We still can." Her plea dissolved into sobs. "I'll do anything, Owen. Please don't leave me." Sophia's voice quivered, filled with desperation. Her words hung in the air while Owen's face remained unreadable. The woman who once looked at him with love and warmth now lay broken and pleading before him. He couldn't stop the flow of memories. 16 years of marriage built on love, promises, and trust. But now, all of that was destroyed by deceit, betrayal, and a plan that nearly cost him his life. Once he had loved her more than anything, but that love had long withered, replaced by a cold emptiness. "It's too late, Sophia," he said, his voice even, devoid of any emotion. "You made your choice." Sophia's breath hitched as she reached out a trembling hand, barely touching his sleeve before he pulled away, increasing the distance between them. The rejection struck her harder than any physical blow. Tears streamed down her face and sobs shook her body, consuming her in waves of sorrow and regret. "Owen, I never wanted this. I thought—" Her voice trailed off, her mind unable to grasp the beliefs she once held. Now, even she couldn't understand what had led her here. The betrayal, the plot to kill him. It all seemed like a twisted nightmare, a chain of terrible choices she couldn't undo. "I thought we could fix everything, be happy again. I was wrong. Please, forgive me." Owen's expression didn't change. He stood there, watching her fall apart, but his eyes held not a trace of sympathy. This was the moment he'd pictured since learning of her betrayal, but seeing her like this didn't bring the satisfaction he'd expected. It only confirmed what he already knew. There was no going back. "You thought murder was the answer?" he asked, his voice steady, emotionless. "You and Lucas wanted me dead, didn't you? You were ready to take everything from me, my life, my future. And for what? Money?" Sophia shook her head vehemently, her hands gripping the sheets as if they could anchor her to reality. No, it wasn't about the money. It was—" She hesitated, searching for words that might make him understand. "Lucas. He manipulated me. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just—" "You knew exactly what you were doing!" Owen cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "You knew the moment you betrayed me." His tone was so cold that each word crushed any hope she still clung to. Sophia's sobs grew more desperate, her body shaking under the weight of guilt pressing down on her. She had never felt so helpless. "I love you, Owen," she whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. "I've always loved you. I just made a terrible mistake. Please don't leave me like this." Owen exhaled slowly, and for a moment something in his eyes softened, as if he might reconsider. But the flicker of compassion vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "I loved you once," he said firmly. "But the woman I loved died the day you decided I wasn't worth saving." Sophia's heart shattered at his words, her anguish turning into unbearable remorse. She reached for him again, but he had already turned, heading toward the door, leaving her behind. "Please, Owen," she called after him, her voice broken as was she, her final desperate plea. "Don't leave me. I need you." He stopped at the doorway, his hand resting on the frame as if he might offer her one last consolation. But when he finally spoke, his back remained turned to her. "You'll have to live with the choices you made, Sophia." His voice was resolute. "Just as I had to." After he left, the door clicked softly, leaving Sophie alone in the cold, empty hospital room. Her sobs echoed in the silence, a painful reminder of everything she had lost. Meanwhile, Owen stepped into the corridor, feeling the weight of his decision. He had achieved his goal, but the victory felt hollow. Sophie had survived, but her world was shattered. Lucas was gone, and Owen, he was free. Yet this freedom had come at an incredibly high price, and he knew well that there was no turning back. As he walked away from the hospital, his mind was on the future. It would certainly be different, but at least now it would be his own future. A future without Sophie, without the betrayal that had once tormented him, and without the shackles of the past. For the first time in a long while, Owen felt at peace. Sitting at the kitchen table in his modest new apartment, bathed in the morning sunlight, he took a deep breath. The apartment was not luxurious, but it was cozy, a complete contrast to the home he had shared with Sophie. Now, it was his space alone. Every detail, from the furniture to the paint on the walls, was his choice. After years of chaos, he finally felt he had control over his life. There were no more hidden agendas, no secrets waiting to be unearthed. He simply looked ahead. The divorce had been finalized a few months earlier. Sophie was left with nothing, exactly as Owen had planned. She begged him, her voice filled with desperation, hoping to spark compassion in him, but Owen was unyielding. He knew that salvaging what had been destroyed was impossible. No matter how much she cried, the damage was irreversible. Their trust had crumbled, and Owen was ready to leave the past behind. The legal process had been exhausting, but in the end, it was worth it. Owen retained his wealth, having placed his assets in a private trust well before the divorce battle began, ensuring that Sophie would receive not a cent. He also swiftly disposed of Lucas's belongings, leaving her absolutely nothing. Finally, she was entirely on her own. For a time, the betrayal still haunted him, a heavy weight that loomed over him. The unsettling thought that those closest to him had wished him harm lingered for a long time. These dark thoughts surfaced in the silence of the night when there was no escaping his mind. But with time, that burden became lighter. Owen realized that his revenge had been satisfying, but it wasn't the end of his story. It was an important chapter, yes, but not the final one. Life was not solely about revenge. It was about rebuilding and discovering something new, something to cherish. Months later, as the chaos subsided, Owen agreed to meet an old friend for a drink. It was his first social outing since the divorce, and the bar felt oddly unfamiliar to him. Laughter and conversation filled the room. People were living their lives, oblivious to the storm he had endured. And yet, for the first time in a long while, Owen didn't feel like a stranger. "You need to get out more," his friend Logan said, giving him a friendly pat on the back. "I'm serious, man. You've been holed up in your place for months." Owen smiled slightly and took a sip of his beer. "I was busy," he replied, not elaborating. Logan raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Busy with what? You don't have a wife to worry about anymore. When was the last time you genuinely enjoyed life?" Owen shrugged, not giving a definite answer. "It's really not that hard," Logan continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, I get it. You've been through a lot, but now you're free. You can do whatever you want." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Meet new people, have some fun. Hell, you might even meet someone worth your time." Owen didn't respond immediately. Part of him still wondered if he was ready. The wounds from his marriage were still fresh, and trust. That felt like a luxury he wasn't prepared to afford again. But then he thought about how far he had come. He had survived a betrayal he once thought would destroy him, emerging from it stronger than before. Maybe, just maybe, there was room in his life for something new. Over the course of the evening, Owen laughed more than he had in years, and in that moment, he realized that Logan was right. For a long time, he withdrew into himself, immersing himself in work and the routine of everyday life to avoid confronting the world around him. But now, sitting in a bustling bar, surrounded by conversations and the clinking of glasses, he had a realization. He no longer wanted to hide. Within a week, Owen agreed to join Logan and a few mutual friends for dinner at a local restaurant. And it was there, across the table, that he saw her for the first time. Ella, introduced briefly as a friend of someone in their group. At first, Owen paid her little attention. He wasn't looking for anyone or anything new. But as the evening stretched on, something about her began to intrigue him. She was unlike anyone he'd met before. If Sophia had been secretive and manipulative, Ella was straightforward, with a warmth that seemed genuine. Her laugh was light, her smile real. When she spoke, her voice carried a gentle kindness that made Owen feel at ease, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. "What do you do?" she asked, taking a sip of her wine, her tone curious but relaxed. "I'm a software developer," Owen replied, glancing up briefly from his plate. "It's a lot of screen time, but I enjoy it," Ella smiled warmly. "That sounds really interesting. I'm sure you get to work on some cool projects." Owen chuckled. "Sometimes," he said with a smile, "and sometimes it's just fixing bugs." They both laughed, and for the first time in a while, Owen felt something change within him. This wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something new, something he hadn't anticipated. Months passed, and Owen and Ella began spending more time together. Their dates were simple: dinners, movies, sometimes a hike. Nothing too serious, nothing rushed. Owen was cautious, not wanting to dive headfirst into a new relationship, but he couldn't ignore how much he enjoyed being with her. She was nothing like Sophia. Ella never demanded details about his past, never tried to pry into his personal life. Instead, she gave him space, letting him handle his feelings at his own pace. One evening after dinner, as they were walking through the park, Ella stopped and turned to him. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said gently, her eyes studying him. "But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Her words caught Owen off guard. She had never asked about his past, never shown any curiosity about Sophia or what had happened, and he was more grateful for this than she could imagine. But standing there in the cool evening air, he realized that he might want to talk about it. For the first time, he felt ready to open up. "It's hard," Owen began, running a hand through his hair. "I went through something very painful. It changed me." Ella's face softened, her eyes filled with understanding. "I understand. We all have scars from what we've been through." Owen exhaled, feeling the weight he'd been carrying for so long begin to lift. "I was married," he said quietly. She betrayed me. It almost broke me, but I made it through. Now, I'm just trying to move forward." Ella didn't speak for a moment. Instead, she gently took his hand. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, "and I'm glad you're moving forward." In that moment, Owen realized he was truly starting to move on. The darkness that once consumed him was receding, giving way to a quiet hope. A new light was breaking through, opening the possibility of something better, something he hadn't allowed himself to dream of before. As they continued their walk, hand in hand, Owen felt a sense of calm wash over him. He didn't know what lay ahead with Ella, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid of the future. The past, the betrayal, The pain that once defined his life no longer held power over him. It was now just a memory. What mattered was the present and the future, which he was finally ready to embrace. And as they strolled through the park, hand in hand, Owen knew this was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. 8 months had passed since the night Sophia and Lucas's betrayal came to light. But now, Owen was in a completely different place, stronger, more grounded, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The night that was supposed to mark the end of Owen's existence unexpectedly became the beginning of an unforeseen chapter in his life. After years of excruciating efforts, he was slowly piecing together the fragments of his shattered life, step by step. Yet, no matter how much peace he found, the sharp pain of betrayal always lurked in the depths of his mind. One quiet afternoon when he returned home, a small package awaited him on his doorstep. It was modest in size, about the dimensions of a book, wrapped in simple brown paper and with no return address. As Owen looked at the package, a sense of unease gripped him. Something about it felt wrong, out of place. For a moment, he thought about throwing it away, leaving the past buried where it belonged. But curiosity proved stronger than caution. Entering his home, he set the package down on the kitchen table, looking at it as though it were something dangerous, like an unexploded bomb. Taking a deep, calming breath, he began to unwrap the package. Beneath the brown paper was a plain cardboard box. Inside, there was only a white envelope. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the handwriting on the front. It was Lucas's handwriting, unmistakably. Owen froze, paralyzed for several moments. Lucas had been dead for a long time. There was no rational explanation for how this letter could have arrived now. His hands shook as he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The words began simply, "Owen, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone, but you know that." Owen gripped the letter tighter, his breath caught in his chest. There was no doubt. It was Lucas's handwriting, casual, confident, as if he were jotting down something ordinary, like a shopping list, rather than addressing the brother he had betrayed. The letter continued, "I know what you're thinking. How could I and Sophia have plotted to kill you, my own brother?" Owen's pulse quickened, and a cold fear crept up his spine. What could possibly follow this? He continued reading, desperate for clarity. "The truth is, it wasn't just about the money or the betrayal," the letter revealed. "The plan took root long before Sophia and I were together." Owen paused, his mind spinning with confusion. What could Lucas mean? Forcing himself to keep reading, he hoped to find answers. "Do you remember Madison, your first wife? Of course you do. She was perfect, wasn't she? Loving, loyal, exactly the way you always wanted her to be." Owen's heart clenched as he read the next line. "She was never yours, Owen. Madison was working for me from the start." Madison, his first wife, the woman who vanished from his life without a trace so many years ago. They'd met in college, fallen in love quickly, and married young. And then one day, she simply disappeared, leaving him devastated. He'd never understood why. "You never understood why Madison left, did you?" Lucas's words continued, driving the knife in deeper. "That's because I paid her to do it. I couldn't stand your happiness. I couldn't let you win. You always had everything. The better career, the nicer home, the approval of our parents. I was always in your shadow, so I took everything I could from you." Owen's vision blurred, the words on the page swimming before his eyes as a wave of emotion crashed over him. His brother had been the cause of his first great suffering, the collapse of his marriage. And after all these years, Lucas had come back, this time with Sophia, to take even more from him. The room around Owen seemed to close in on him as the unbearable weight of these revelations bore down on him. "I didn't expect you to figure it all out so soon," the letter went on. "Sophia and I thought we'd have more time to finish what we started. And by the way, she never cared about you. For her, it was always just about the money. In the end, I think she even hated you." Owen's world crumbled as the final pieces of betrayal fell into place. The scale of the deception was staggering, destroying everything he had once believed in. Everything happening around him felt overwhelming. Owen slammed the letter onto the table with a loud thud, his body trembling with rage. He began pacing the room nervously, weighed down by Lucas's words like an unbearable burden. How could he have been so naive? For years, without even realizing it, he had been just a pawn in Lucas's cold, calculated game. Lucas had manipulated every significant blow Owen had endured, like a sinister puppeteer controlling his every move. But it wasn't just about that. Sitting back down, Owen narrowed his eyes and continued reading. "You probably think you've won now that I'm gone," the letter read. "But the truth is, Owen, I never lost. Even in death, Lucas had found a way to torment him. I've left my mark on your life forever. You will never escape me. Every time you trust someone, every time you love, this letter will haunt you. It will remind you that even those you hold dearest are unworthy of trust." Clenching his fists, Owen absorbed these final, cruel lines. "You may have survived, but now you'll carry this with you for the rest of your days. I'll always be there, lurking in the shadows of your thoughts. You'll never be rid of me." The letter ended with this final, chilling taunt from beyond the grave. Owen sat motionless, staring at the letter as a suffocating silence filled the room. A wave of fury surged through his body, his hands shaking as he crumpled the letter and threw it across the room. For a long time he sat in the same spot, paralyzed by a storm of confusion and anger. Lucas had already stolen so much from him, his marriage, his peace, his ability to trust. And even now, from the grave, Lucas had found a way to wound him one last time. But slowly, as the minutes passed, something inside Owen began to change. Yes, Lucas had left scars. Yes, those wounds would remain. But one undeniable truth lingered. Owen had survived. He had emerged from this wreckage stronger, wiser, and finally free. Lucas was dead, and no posthumous manipulations could change that. Slowly, Owen stood, walked over to where the crumpled letter lay, and smoothed it out. He carefully placed it back in its envelope. Without hesitation, he approached the fireplace, struck a match, and watched as the letter curled and blackened, consumed by the flames. As the letter turned to ashes, Owen felt a profound sense of closure. Lucas's hold on him had finally been broken. Owen was no longer the man ensnared in Lucas's treacherous web. He had grown, he understood, and most importantly, he was moving on. Taking a deep, calming breath, Owen turned away from the fire, leaving the past behind, reduced to ashes where it belonged. The doorbell rang, and Owen smiled, already knowing who it was. Ella had promised to come for dinner, and he felt ready. Ready to embrace the future and let go of the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. When he opened the door and saw Ella's warm smile, Owen realized that, whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on, and this time he would do it on his own terms. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the Force be with you.